Serafina Westbrook had always prided herself on blending into the background, quietly moving through life as if she were invisible. It was a skill she had mastered over the years, one that allowed her to live comfortably without drawing attention. Most people assumed she was just another modest widow, living off her late husband's pension and life insurance. And for years that was the story she told. A widow, a mother, a simple woman. But today, that story was about to change. The wedding of her son, Milo Hawke, and his new wife, Kendall Blaze, was everything Serafina had imagined, and more. The ceremony took place at the Sterling estate, a sprawling mansion nestled in the hills, surrounded by the kind of opulence that most people only dreamed of. It was the kind of place where every detail had been carefully planned to exude wealth, from the towering ice sculptures to the 12-piece orchestra playing in the background. It was the wedding of the year, the kind of event where the rich and powerful gathered to celebrate, to show off, to indulge in their luxury. And then there was Serafina. She stood in the corner, feeling out of place but trying not to show it. Her dress, a simple navy blue number from a department store, was modest, yet elegant. It was nothing like the designer gowns and sparkling diamonds she saw around her. Her grandmother's pearl necklace was her only concession to formality, but even that was understated. Serafina wasn't interested in flashy displays or drawing attention to herself. She had perfected the art of subtlety, of being almost invisible, and she was content with that. As she watched Milo, her son, dance with Kendall, she couldn't help but feel a bittersweet joy. Milo, now 32, looked happier than he had in years, his smile wide and genuine. Serafina knew that Kendall had brought a light back into his life that had been missing since the passing of his father. But she also knew that her quiet, simple life was about to collide with the world that Kendall represented. A world of wealth, privilege, and hidden agendas. As she glanced around, Serafina couldn't help but notice the way Kendall's mother, Delilah Foster, was sizing her up. There was a look of quiet disdain in her eyes, as if Serafina didn't quite fit in with the rest of the decor. Delilah had always struck her as the kind of person who thought she was superior, and Serafina had never been one to challenge that. But it was the moment Maverick Sterling, the patriarch of the Sterling family, locked eyes with her across the room that everything changed. His gaze was sharp, calculating. And then, to Serafina's shock, he gasped. "Serafina Westbrook," he murmured, almost to himself, his voice cutting through the laughter and chatter of the reception. "Aren't you the woman from the Reynolds Holdings acquisition board 3 years ago? The mysterious investor who bought my company?" Time seemed to slow. Serafina's heart skipped a beat, and for the first time in a long while, she felt exposed. This wasn't just a business meeting. This wasn't just a casual encounter. Maverick Sterling had just shattered the carefully constructed facade she had spent years building. The room seemed to freeze. Kendall's face drained of color, her look of superiority replaced by confusion. Delilah blinked, her diamond bracelet catching the light as she instinctively reached for her neck. The wheels in her mind were already turning, and Serafina could almost hear them grinding to a halt. The truth was, people never really understood what true wealth looked like. They assumed it came in flashy cars, designer clothes, and towering mansions. But Serafina knew better. Her wealth didn't need to scream. It was quiet, discreet, and until now, it had remained a secret. But now, with Maverick's recognition, the mask was slipping. The secret was out. Serafina smiled faintly, trying to mask the panic she felt bubbling inside her. She looked at Maverick Sterling, the man who had once sold his company, and now seemed to be staring at her as though he'd discovered something far more valuable than any financial transaction. "I think you're confusing me with someone else," she said quietly. Her voice steady, but her mind racing. But Maverick Sterling wasn't fooled. He had seen her in that boardroom 3 years ago. He knew exactly who she was, and he wasn't going to let her stay invisible for long. The words Maverick Sterling spoke cut through the lively chatter of the reception like a hot knife through butter. "Serafina Westbrook," he said, his voice low but piercing. "Aren't you the woman from the Reynolds Holdings acquisition board 3 years ago? The mysterious investor who bought my company?" Serafina's stomach lurched. For a moment, the room felt too loud, the music and laughter far too distant. Kendall Blaze stood frozen, her smile faltering as she looked from her father to Serafina with growing disbelief. Delilah Foster, her mother, instinctively clutched the sparkling diamond bracelet on her wrist, the weight of the moment sinking in. A single soft gasp escaped from Maverick's lips, as if he couldn't quite believe what he had just revealed. Serafina's face remained impassive, but inside, everything was shifting. She had built her life on discretion, on being almost invisible to the world. She had perfected the art of blending in, of slipping by unnoticed, never drawing the spotlight. But now, standing in front of a room full of strangers, and more importantly, her son, Milo Hawk, her secret was out. Her mind raced. How had he known? For a moment, Serafina considered denying it, to maintain her carefully crafted illusion. But that would be futile. Maverick knew. She could see it in his eyes. The realization hit her like a wave. There was no going back. Kendall stood still, her shock evident. She had been acting the role of the perfect wife, always polite, always poised. But now her sharp green eyes were wide with confusion and concern. Her father, too, was now standing taller, his mouth slightly agape as he processed the words he had just spoken. A sudden silence enveloped the room, leaving only the soft clinking of glasses and the hum of the orchestra playing in the background. The tension was palpable. Serafina took a deep breath, her hand subconsciously clutching the glass of champagne she hadn't realized she was holding. Her heart hammered against her chest, but she held her ground. Her public persona, the image she had carefully cultivated for so many years, was now crumbling under the weight of this revelation. "I think you're confusing me with someone else," Serafina said, her voice steady, but it was clear that she was losing the battle with her emotions. She wasn't sure if it was the shock or the weight of the truth bearing down on her, but her usual calm was slipping. The room remained in suspended silence as Maverick Sterling eyed her closely, his gaze unwavering. He didn't respond immediately, letting the gravity of the situation settle in. It was then that Kendall spoke up, her voice laced with a strange combination of curiosity and alarm. "What do you mean, Dad?" she asked, her eyes darting between Serafina and Maverick. Her father, still in disbelief, shook his head slowly. "I've seen you before, haven't I?" At that acquisition meeting, the words hung in the air like an unspoken truth. Serafina's eyes narrowed, but she refused to let them see the vulnerability that threatened to surface. Her son, Milo, had been standing nearby, laughing with friends, his face still alight with happiness. But as he turned and caught sight of the tense exchange, his expression faltered. His eyes shifted from his new wife to Serafina, confusion flooding his features. "Mom?" Milo asked, taking a few steps toward her. For the first time in years, Serafina felt exposed, her carefully guarded secret now laid bare before the people she had worked so hard to distance herself from. The woman she had always been, the modest widow, the quiet mother, was no longer a disguise she could wear. Kendall, sensing the growing tension, finally spoke again. "So, what does this mean, Serafina?" Her tone, once warm and friendly, now held a sharp edge. "Are you telling me that you've been hiding your true wealth all this time?" Serafina glanced at her son, who now looked at her with a mixture of disbelief and concern. Milo had always believed that they lived comfortably, but modestly. He had no idea about the fortune Serafina had accumulated over the years. He had no idea that the house they lived in, the vacations they had taken, and the quiet lifestyle they led were funded by a secret treasure trove. The truth had always been something Serafina had kept hidden from her son. She never wanted him to feel entitled, never wanted him to think that his success was tied to anything other than his own hard work. But now, Milo was about to find out that the world he thought he knew was built on a very different foundation. Serafina's voice caught in her throat, but she finally managed to speak. "Milo, there's something I need to tell you." Her words were soft, but they carried the weight of everything she had kept from him for the last 15 years. She could already see the questions forming in his eyes, the hurt and confusion beginning to creep into his face, and, as much as she had prepared for this moment, she knew that there was no easy way to explain. In this moment, Serafina realized that her carefully curated life was no longer something she could protect. Her son's world was about to shatter, and there was no way to shield him from the truth. As the tension in the room grew unbearable, Serafina's mind drifted back to a simpler time. A time when she had no idea that her life would take this strange, complex turn. The room around her blurred as she recalled the early days of her marriage, the days before the money, the attention, the secrets. It had been so easy to slip into the shadows back then. Back when she was just Serafina Calder, the young wife of Thaddeus Calder, an ambitious engineer who always saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. Thaddeus had always been a dreamer. They had both started from nothing, two engineers working long hours in a cramped office in Austin, Texas. The work was grueling, the pay was modest, and their lives were filled with simple pleasures. Even their tiny apartment, with its mismatched furniture and worn-out carpet, had felt like home. It was in that small, cluttered workspace that Thaddeus had an idea that would change everything. He had spent years tinkering with a concept that seemed so simple, yet so revolutionary. A new power management system that would double the life of cell phone batteries without increasing their size. It wasn't glamorous or flashy, but it was brilliant. When Thaddeus finally presented his prototype to a tech company, they saw the potential immediately. The deal that followed was nothing short of life-changing. In 2012, Thaddeus and Serafina sold the patent for $25 million, a sum that felt both unreal and exhilarating. But instead of rushing out to buy a mansion or indulge in luxuries, Thaddeus and Serafina made a choice that would define their lives for the next decade. They chose to live quietly. To continue working, to remain humble, and to keep the fortune they had just acquired a secret. The idea of flaunting their wealth never appealed to them. For them, the money was not a badge of honor, but a tool they could use to shape their future and protect their family. Serafina had always known that their son, Milo Hawk, should never feel the weight of their wealth. Milo was bright, independent, and driven by his own desire to succeed. She and Thaddeus had always been determined to teach him the value of hard work, not entitlement. They didn't want him to ever believe that his successes were due to anything other than his own merit. So, they kept everything under wraps. Instead of flashy purchases or extravagant vacations, they invested. Every penny of the $25 million went into carefully selected stocks, real estate, and technology startups. Thaddeus, with his keen eye for emerging markets and undervalued assets, took the reins. The investments were methodical and slow, but over time, they began to grow. In 2015, their portfolio was worth $50 million. By 2018, it had doubled to $200 million. And by the time Thaddeus passed away in 2020, their wealth had soared to $800 million. The numbers were staggering, yet they remained tucked away in a series of legal structures and offshore accounts, out of the public eye. Serafina often thought about the decision they had made, to live in the shadows, to hide their wealth behind a veil of modesty. It had been easy at first, but as time went on, it became more difficult. Milo was growing up, becoming more aware of the world around him. He worked tirelessly, building his career in marketing, saving for his own home, and living with a sense of accomplishment. And Serafina never wanted him to know that his family's wealth could have bought him anything he desired. That, with the snap of a finger, they could have been among the richest families in the country. But instead, they lived humbly, quietly, and out of the public's prying eyes. The decision to keep their wealth a secret wasn't without its internal battles. Serafina wrestled with guilt every time she saw Milo sacrifice to build his life. She knew he had no idea how easy his journey could have been. But at the same time, she clung to the belief that this was the best path for him. That true success came from hard work, not inheritance. In a way, Thaddeus had always been the visionary. He had seen the future and understood that money, when misused, could destroy the very values they had worked so hard to instill in Milo. And Serafina had chosen to carry that vision forward, even after his death, keeping their wealth carefully guarded and invisible. But now, as Maverick Sterling's words echoed in her mind, Serafina understood the irony of it all. The wealth she had tried so hard to protect, to shield from the world, was no longer hers to control. The world was starting to see her for who she really was. And the question was, could she still protect Milo from the truth? Could she shield him from the fallout of her decisions? Or was it already too late? The wedding was over, but the storm had only just begun. Serafina sat in the quiet of her modest apartment the morning after, nursing a cup of lukewarm coffee, her hands shaking ever so slightly. She had barely slept. The events of the previous night replayed in her mind like an unrelenting loop. Maverick Sterling's recognition of her had changed everything, and now the fallout was inevitable. Milo Hawke had called her early, his voice frantic, his words clipped and urgent. He was coming over, demanding answers, and Serafina knew she couldn't avoid him any longer. When the doorbell rang, her heart skipped a beat. She stood up quickly, brushing the stray strands of gray hair behind her ear, and smoothed down the simple blouse she had chosen for the day. She hadn't expected things to unravel so quickly, but now the truth was staring her in the face. Milo walked into the apartment like a man on a mission, his face taut with frustration. He was no longer the bright-eyed, optimistic young man she had once known. Today he was all sharp edges and confusion, a storm of emotions barely contained beneath the surface. "Mom, we need to talk," he said, his voice tight, the weight of his words making the air in the room feel thick. He was pacing now, the way he always did when he was upset, running a hand through his dark hair in agitation. "What was last night all about? Why didn't you tell me?" Serafina could feel the guilt rising in her chest like bile, threatening to choke her. She hadn't prepared for this, hadn't prepared for Milo to question everything, to demand an explanation for the life she had kept hidden from him for so long. "Milo, please. Sit down, let's talk about this." She gestured to the worn sofa, trying to keep her voice steady, but she could feel her composure slipping. Milo refused to sit. He stood there, his arms crossed over his chest, eyes blazing with frustration. "I'm not sitting down," he snapped, his voice rising. "I don't even know who you are anymore, Mom. I thought we were living modestly. You told me we were just fine, that we didn't need to flaunt anything. I've been working my ass off, saving every penny, thinking I was doing the right thing. But then last night I find out you're a multimillionaire. What the hell is going on?" Serafina closed her eyes for a moment, the weight of his words sinking into her like lead. How could she explain this? How could she make him understand the choices she had made? The choices she thought were for the best. "Milo," she began, her voice softer now, almost fragile. She took a deep breath before continuing, choosing her words carefully. "We never wanted you to know. Your father and I, we decided that the best way to protect you was to keep this all hidden. We didn't want you to feel like your success was tied to money." Milo's gaze softened just a fraction, but his confusion still clouded his eyes. "But why?" he asked, his voice quieter now. "Why keep it from me?" "Because we wanted you to earn your place in the world." Serafina's words came out slowly, each one measured and deliberate. "We didn't want you to think that you could rely on wealth or inheritance to get by. I wanted you to build your life on your own merits, Milo. That's why I never told you. I didn't want you to be weighed down by the expectations that come with wealth." Milo ran his hands through his hair again, a gesture that made it clear just how conflicted he was. "But Mom, I don't get it. You've been hiding this all these years, and now I find out that we could have had everything. I could have had everything. Why wouldn't you want to share that with me? Why keep me in the dark?" Serafina felt the sharp sting of his words. The truth was, she had never wanted him to feel entitled to anything. She had wanted him to have the freedom to live his life without the pressure of expectations. But now she realized that in doing so, she had kept him from knowing the reality of their situation. It wasn't about keeping you in the dark. "Milo," Serafina explained, her voice trembling slightly. "It was about protecting you. I wanted you to have the freedom to make your own choices, to succeed without thinking you had to live up to some image of wealth. Your father and I wanted you to have your own life, to live on your terms." Milo's frustration was still palpable, but now there was something else in his eyes, a hint of hurt. Hurt that his mother had kept such a monumental secret from him. Hurt that the life he had worked so hard to build might have been unnecessary if only he had known. The conflict inside him was raw and evident. "I don't know, Mom. This doesn't feel like protecting me," Milo said, his voice quieter now, as if he were trying to process everything all at once. "This feels like deception." Serafina flinched at the word, but she didn't deny it. In some ways, that's exactly what it had been. She had deceived him, and now there was no way to undo the damage. "I didn't want you to think that your worth came from money. Milo, I wanted you to understand that your value is in what you build, what you create, not in a bank account or a stock portfolio." Serafina's voice was almost pleading now, her eyes searching his face for understanding. "But what about us? What about what I could have had?" Milo asked, his voice cracking. "What do you expect me to think now? That I've been living some kind of lie?" The silence between them was heavy, thick with unresolved tension. Serafina knew this conversation wasn't over. It was only just beginning. But as Milo turned away, unable to look her in the eye any longer, Serafina realized that no explanation, no matter how carefully crafted, could undo the fracture in their relationship. The truth had come out, and nothing would ever be the same again. The weeks following the wedding had been filled with a quiet tension, one that Serafina Westbrook could feel in the pit of her stomach. The weight of the truth had been laid bare at the reception, and the ripples of that moment spread further than she had anticipated. What had begun as an innocent revelation about her secret wealth had quickly spiraled into a deeper, darker confrontation. And then came Kendall Blaze. Serafina had suspected it. But it didn't make it any easier when she received the news. Kendall, unable to accept the humbling defeat at the wedding, had taken matters into her own hands. The quiet whispers Serafina had heard about Kendall's sharp mind and her ambition now made sense. What Serafina hadn't anticipated was how far Kendall would go to uncover the full extent of her family's financial situation. Victor Quinn, Serafina's trusted financial advisor, had called early one morning. His voice was tense, his usual calm replaced by something more urgent. "Serafina," he said, his tone clipped, "I need to warn you about something. It seems your daughter-in-law has hired a private investigator." Serafina felt the blood drain from her face. Kendall had crossed a line, and now the thin veil of privacy Serafina had spent years weaving was beginning to unravel. "A private investigator?" Serafina echoed, the words tasting foreign on her tongue. "What exactly are they looking into?" "Your financial history." Victor paused, a heavy silence hanging in the air. "They've been asking questions about the acquisition of Reynolds Holdings, about your investments and the structure of your assets. I'm not sure what they're aiming for, but I'm concerned. If this investigation goes any further, it could jeopardize the privacy you've worked so hard to protect." Serafina's hand tightened around the phone, her mind racing. She had expected Kendall to be suspicious, to dig deeper into the family's affairs. But this felt like a personal attack, a challenge that would force Serafina to make decisions she hadn't planned on. Kendall wasn't just trying to uncover the truth for her own curiosity. No, this was a calculated move, one that could lead to exposing everything Serafina had kept hidden for so long. The shell companies, the offshore accounts, the complex legal structures that had protected her wealth. It was all in danger now. Serafina stood up and walked over to the window, looking out at the city below. The familiar rhythm of life outside seemed so distant, so far removed from the storm brewing inside her home. She had spent years hiding in the shadows. But now, with Kendall's investigation, Serafina realized that her privacy was no longer a choice. It was being ripped away, piece by piece. "Victor," she said, her voice steady but cold, "I need to know everything. If Kendall is digging, I want to know what she's found." "I'm on it." Victor's voice softened. "But be careful. This is no longer just about protecting your privacy. There's a bigger game at play here. Kendall's playing for something much more than answers." The conversation ended, but Serafina's mind raced with one thought. How far would Kendall Blaze go? And what exactly was she after? The next day, Serafina decided to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't sit back and wait for the storm to break over her family. If Kendall wanted answers, Serafina would give her a lesson in who she was dealing with. The confrontation came sooner than she expected. Serafina had asked Kendall to meet her. And to her surprise, Kendall had agreed. The meeting was set at a small cafe, a place Serafina knew well. Simple, quiet, and far removed from the extravagance that surrounded Kendall's world. When Kendall arrived, she looked every bit the part of the confident, polished woman Serafina had come to expect, dressed in a designer suit that screamed ambition, her sharp features framed by perfectly styled hair. "Serafina," Kendall greeted her with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "It's good to see you again." Serafina smiled back, a tight, controlled gesture. "I thought we should talk." They sat down, and the tension between them was immediate. Kendall was far too aware of the power she held now. The questions she had asked, the investigation she had started, all of it to push Serafina into a corner. And yet it was clear Kendall was still playing a game, unsure of just how much Serafina knew. "You've been very quiet about your financial situation," Kendall began, her tone sharp but sweet, like a snake coiled beneath a velvet glove. "I can't help but wonder why." Serafina leaned back, studying her, the weight of the moment settling in. She could feel the wariness creeping up her spine, but she wasn't about to let Kendall believe for 1 second that she was weak. "I don't owe you any explanations," Serafina replied, her voice calm, almost cold. "But you've been poking around in places you shouldn't, Kendall." For the first time, Kendall faltered, her eyes narrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" she asked, but it wasn't a question. It was a challenge. "I know what you've been doing. The investigator, the questions about my finances." Serafina's voice remained unwavering. "But I'm warning you, Kendall. Keep digging, and you'll find yourself in a situation you can't control." Kendall's lips parted, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. But Serafina was already taking the next step. "I know what you're after." Serafina's eyes locked with Kendall's, and for the first time, she felt the surge of power she had kept hidden for so long. "And I can assure you, you're playing a game with far higher stakes than you realize." The lunch was set at one of those upscale, modern restaurants with floor-to-ceiling windows and minimalist decor, a place where the price tag was as high as the pretentiousness of its patrons. Serafina Westbrook had been to enough of these kinds of meetings to know how they played out. A lot of smiles, a lot of small talk, but little substance. However, today was different. Today, the stakes were higher. As Serafina entered the restaurant, she couldn't shake the uneasy feeling gnawing at her. Milo Hawk had been reluctant to attend, his eyes still clouded with the confusion and anger from their last conversation. But Kendall Blaze, ever the strategist, had insisted. The tension between the three of them had been palpable since the wedding, and now it was about to reach its boiling point. Serafina spotted them immediately. Milo, seated across from Kendall, looked stiff, his eyes darting nervously between his wife and mother. He was wearing the same, slightly too tight look he always had when he didn't know how to navigate difficult situations, an expression Serafina knew all too well. But it was Kendall who immediately caught her attention. Kendall sat upright, her posture perfect, her smile too controlled, too rehearsed. She looked every bit the part of the high-powered businesswoman she claimed to be, dressed in a designer suit that screamed authority. Serafina couldn't help but notice how calculated Kendall's every move was, from the way she adjusted her napkin to the way her eyes glinted with purpose as they met Serafina's. "Serafina," Kendall greeted her sweetly, her voice dripping with honey, but Serafina could detect the sharp edges underneath. "I'm so glad you could make it. I thought it would be a good idea to sit down and discuss how we can move forward as a family." Milo offered a strained smile, his discomfort obvious. "Yeah, Mom, I think it's time we all talk." Serafina took her seat slowly, her movements measured, her expression calm. She could feel the tension crackling in the air like static before a storm, but she refused to let it show. She wasn't going to let Kendall Blaze control this conversation. Not today. The waiter brought their drinks, and the moment of small talk passed. Kendall was the first to break the silence. "You know, Serafina," she began, her voice still smooth but carrying an edge now. "I've been thinking a lot about our family's financial future. I know we've had some differences in the past, but I think it's time for us to take a more collaborative approach to managing things." Serafina raised an eyebrow, her hands resting casually on the table. "Collaborative?" she repeated, keeping her tone neutral, though she could feel the stirrings of suspicion. Kendall was always so measured, so controlled. The last thing she wanted was a collaboration. Serafina could sense the strings of manipulation already being pulled. "Exactly," Kendall continued, her eyes glinting with something more dangerous now. "Milo and I were discussing it, and we think that it would be much more effective if we had some say in the financial decisions. A kind of shared governance, if you will." Serafina narrowed her eyes ever so slightly. "Shared governance," she repeated, her voice deliberate. She leaned in just a little, her gaze unwavering. "What exactly do you mean by that?" "Well," Kendall said, taking a sip of her water, her fingers trailing delicately over the rim of the glass, "we could establish a family trust, something that would include all of us. We could set up a board of trustees, with each of us having a say in how things are managed. That way, we could protect your privacy, while also ensuring that we're all involved." Serafina resisted the urge to smile. A board of trustees? Kendall was playing her cards with the precision of someone who had studied the game for years, someone who knew exactly what she wanted and was willing to manipulate the situation to get it. How very democratic, Serafina said softly, her eyes never leaving Kendall's. "And I suppose the shared governance means that Milo and you would have equal say in the family's finances, correct?" Her voice was calm, but the weight of her words made Kendall flinch just slightly. "Yes," Kendall answered confidently, her smile unwavering. "We would all have equal say. The wealth should be managed by the family, for the family, don't you think?" There it was, the underlying truth, the subtle manipulation. Kendall Blaze wasn't interested in managing the wealth for the family. She was interested in controlling it, and Serafina knew it. Kendall wasn't asking for a partnership. She was asking for power. The kind of power that would put her in control of everything Serafina had worked for. Serafina could feel the weight of the moment pressing on her chest, but she refused to let it show. She dealt with worse than this. She wasn't going to let Kendall Blaze take what was rightfully hers, not without a fight. "Interesting," Serafina said, her tone casual, but her eyes sharp as knives. "So you want me to hand over control of everything I've built in exchange for, what exactly? A family trust that could easily be used to manipulate me into giving up more than I ever intended." Kendall tilted her head slightly, as if considering her words carefully. "It's not about manipulation, Serafina. It's about ensuring stability and transparency. You've been very secretive, and I think it's time for all of us to have a clearer understanding of where we stand. After all, we are family now, aren't we?" The word family hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Serafina could almost hear Kendall's thoughts. "You've hidden everything from me. Now it's my turn to take control." The tension between them thickened. Milo, who had been silent until now, finally spoke, his voice low and uncertain. "Mom, is this true?" "What Kendall's saying? About us working together? Is that really the best way forward?" Serafina looked at her son, his face a mixture of confusion and concern. He didn't yet understand the full weight of what Kendall Blaze was proposing. He didn't see the layers of manipulation underneath the polished veneer. "Milo," Serafina began, her voice softening. "What Kendall is proposing sounds like cooperation, but it's really about control. She wants a piece of everything I've built, and she'll use your trust in her to get it." Milo looked at her, the realization dawning in his eyes. He was starting to see the full picture. The pieces were clicking into place. He could see the shift in his mother's demeanor, the calm, composed woman who had always protected him, now stepping forward to protect what was hers, and, more importantly, what was his. Kendall leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "You're being irrational." Serafina's lips curled into a faint smile. "Am I? Or are you just upset because the truth is starting to surface?" The table fell silent, the weight of Serafina's words settling in. Milo finally looked at Kendall, his expression now full of doubt. Kendall, the woman he had married, the woman he had trusted, was now exposed for what she truly was, a strategist playing a dangerous game for control. Serafina sat back in her chair, her calm demeanor a stark contrast to the storm brewing beneath the surface. It wasn't just about money anymore. It was about power, manipulation, and family, and Serafina was done playing by Kendall Blaze's rules. The moment Serafina Westbrook made her decision, everything else fell away. The clink of silverware, the hum of the city outside the restaurant windows, the quiet tension in the air. It all seemed distant now. The game had shifted, and Serafina had just made her move. She knew exactly what she was doing. Kendall Blaze had underestimated her. She had underestimated just how far Serafina was willing to go to protect what was hers, to protect Milo. When they had left the restaurant, the tension had remained thick in the air between them. Milo had been quiet, lost in thought, his eyes flickering between his mother and his wife. Kendall, on the other hand, had walked out with that confident, almost smug posture. But Serafina knew better than to let her guard down now. They were playing a dangerous game. Kendall had gone too far, and it was time to end it, before she risked losing everything. Serafina sat in her quiet apartment, the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. The details of her plan were already laid out in front of her, a simple, coldly calculated offer. $5 million. It was more than generous, more than Kendall Blaze could have hoped for in a legal battle. But it came with conditions, the kind that would rid her life of the parasite she had allowed in. The text message was simple. Kendall, I will offer you $5 million in exchange for your immediate withdrawal from all investigations. I want a signed agreement that you will never contact me or my son again, under any circumstances. This is your final chance to walk away with your dignity intact. Regards, Serafina Westbrook. There was no room for negotiation, no space for further manipulation. This was Serafina's way of cutting the ties once and for all. The offer was a clean break, a decisive end to the toxic influence Kendall had imposed on their lives. She clicked send, and just like that, the waiting game began. The phone buzzed in her hand. A text notification from Kendall. It was a brief reply, but the words struck a nerve. $5 million? You must be joking. Serafina didn't flinch. This was what she had expected. Kendall would scoff, would try to negotiate, but the price had been set, and it wasn't just about the money. It was about sending a message, one that Kendall couldn't ignore. The next day, Serafina received a call from Milo. His voice was tense, strained. "Mom, what is this?" he asked, his words barely audible over the line. "You've really gone through with it? A $5 million settlement? You're just going to pay her off and make her go away?" Serafina could feel the judgment in his tone, but she didn't let it shake her. She had made the decision with his best interests in mind. She had always tried to protect him, but now it was her turn to stand firm. "Milo, this isn't just about the money," Serafina said calmly, her voice unwavering. "This is about ending the investigation and removing Kendall from our lives for good. She doesn't understand that she can't just manipulate us like this. She thinks she can control everything, but I won't let her." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Serafina could almost hear Milo's mind racing as he processed her words, as he tried to reconcile what he was hearing with the life he thought he knew. His voice finally broke through the silence. "You're just going to end it like this? Mom, I don't know if I can agree with this." Serafina closed her eyes for a moment. She knew how hard this was for Milo. He had always believed in fairness, in doing the right thing. But the truth was, fairness had never been the currency Kendall was playing with. And now Serafina had to protect the life she had worked so hard to build, the life she had kept hidden for so long. "Milo, I'm doing this to protect you." Serafina's voice softened, but there was steel behind it. "I'm doing this to protect our family. You're not just my son, you're my priority. Kendall's already trying to tear us apart. I'm not going to let that happen." When Milo finally responded, his voice was quieter, more resigned. "I understand, Mom, I don't know what to do anymore. I feel like I'm caught between two worlds." Serafina's heart ached. She knew this wasn't easy for him. She had spent years sheltering him from the weight of their wealth, from the consequences of their decisions. But now, there was no turning back. "You don't have to do anything, Milo," she said gently. "I've already made the decision. It's done. I'm protecting you, and I'm protecting our future." There was a long silence, and then Milo sighed. "I trust you, Mom, but just promise me this. Promise me you're not doing this to push me away. Serafina closed her eyes and exhaled. I promise, Milo, this is for you. For both of us. Later that day, Serafina received another message from Kendall, this time with a more serious tone. I've spoken to my lawyer, and we're prepared to take this to court if necessary. I'm not backing down from this, Serafina, but I'll consider your offer. Let's meet to discuss. Serafina didn't hesitate. She knew what Kendall's game was now, but she wasn't about to be manipulated into a drawn-out battle. The next meeting was set. Milo arrived later that evening, his face still etched with the conflict of the day. As he stepped into the apartment, he looked at Serafina, his expression a mix of concern and resignation. Mom, I don't know if this is the right choice, but I understand why you're doing it. Serafina nodded, her expression softening for a brief moment. I'm doing what I think is best. I always have, Milo, but this is the final decision. We can't let Kendall manipulate us any longer. As Milo sat down beside her, a flicker of doubt still lingered in his eyes. Serafina could see it, the pain of betrayal, the hurt of learning that his mother had kept such a monumental secret. But for the first time, she could also see something else. The beginning of understanding. The $5 million offer wasn't just about money. It was about reclaiming control, about proving to Kendall Blaze that she had underestimated Serafina Westbrook. The power had shifted, and Serafina was ready for the battle that lay ahead. The days after the $5 million offer passed in a blur. It was as though a door had slammed shut on the family, and the room echoed with the deafening silence of consequences. Milo Hawk could barely sleep. His mind raced, unable to find peace. The stark contrast between the life he had lived and the one his mother had kept hidden from him had torn through him like a storm. And now, the aftermath was impossible to ignore. The legal battle was escalating quickly. Kendall Blaze had already filed for legal separation, citing irreconcilable differences, and had contacted her lawyer to initiate formal proceedings. The news hit Milo like a punch to the gut. The marriage he had worked so hard to build, the woman he had trusted with his heart. It was all unraveling in front of him, and the threads of that unraveling kept pulling him in conflicting directions. He couldn't understand how it had come to this. He wanted to be loyal to Kendall, to believe that their relationship was stronger than any financial dispute. But then, the truth about his mother's wealth, a truth he hadn't even known existed, had been shoved in his face. The financial empire that Serafina Westbrook had quietly amassed, the money she had kept hidden, felt like a betrayal. How could she have kept this from him? How could she have let him live in ignorance for all these years? The more he tried to rationalize it, the more confused he became. He stood in the middle of his apartment, staring out the window at the city below, but his mind was a million miles away. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he glanced at the screen. Serafina Westbrook. He sighed, rubbed his face with both hands, and answered the call. Milo, I need to talk to you. Serafina's voice was calm, but there was an edge of urgency behind it. We need to discuss what's happening and how we move forward from here. Move forward? Milo's voice cracked with frustration. How can I move forward, Mom? Everything's falling apart. You've ruined my marriage. Kendall's filed for separation. What was I supposed to do? I can't just pretend this isn't happening. Serafina paused on the other end, and for a moment, there was only silence. It was the kind of silence that made everything feel heavy, like there was too much left unsaid. I didn't mean for it to be like this, Milo. Serafina's voice softened, and she sighed. I thought I was protecting you. I thought I was keeping you safe from all of this. From the weight of the money, from the weight of expectations. I thought you deserved to live your life without this hanging over you. But you were lying to me. The words spilled out of Milo's mouth before he could stop them, a wave of anger rising in his chest. I don't even know who you are anymore, Mom. All these years, I thought we were just a normal family. And now, I find out you've been living this massive lie, hiding a fortune from me? There was another pause, this one even heavier than before. Serafina's voice was quieter this time, but still filled with the weight of the years of secrecy she had carried. I didn't want you to feel the burden of it, Milo. I didn't want you to think that everything you had, everything you earned, came from my wealth. I didn't want to take away your independence. Milo let out a short, humorless laugh. Independence? What about the independence of knowing the truth? The independence of knowing that you're not just some widow living modestly, but the hidden owner of a multi-million-dollar fortune? Why didn't you trust me with that? Serafina's words hung in the air. I was trying to protect you from the complications, Milo. I was trying to shield you from the mess of it all. But it wasn't just the money. Milo was coming to terms with the fact that it wasn't just about wealth. It was the lies, the years of secrets, that stung the most. He felt like everything had been a facade, a carefully constructed illusion. Kendall's investigation into the family's finances had dug up things that, as much as he tried to deny it, were the seeds of all this chaos. And now, Kendall was ready to walk away, ready to tear their marriage apart because of the secrets he had been kept in the dark about for so long. The truth felt like a wound that wouldn't heal. Kendall filed for separation today. "Mom," Milo said, his voice barely above a whisper, "she doesn't even want to be with me anymore. She says she needs space and that we're too different. How do I fix this? How do I fix everything?" Serafina's heart broke at her son's words, but she knew there was no easy answer. Kendall's ambition and Milo's loyalty had collided with a force no one could have anticipated. "You can't fix it, Milo, not alone," Serafina said softly. "But you need to ask yourself some hard questions. The truth is, Kendall married you because she thought you were something you weren't. She wasn't looking at you. She was looking at the potential she thought your family could offer her." "I never wanted you to feel that pressure." Her words stung, but Milo couldn't deny them. The realization that Kendall might have been more interested in his family's fortune than in him was a harsh pill to swallow. The pain in his voice was evident. "But she's my wife, Mom. I love her. And now it feels like I don't even know who she really is." Serafina's voice softened. "Milo, sometimes love isn't enough when the foundation of the relationship is built on the wrong things. Kendall has her own goals, her own desires. But you need to look at what matters most to you and how much you're willing to sacrifice for it." Milo was silent for a moment. The weight of the situation pressed down on him like an anchor pulling him under. "I don't know what to do, Mom. I feel lost." Serafina closed her eyes. The hardest part of being a mother was watching your child struggle with a truth you could never have prepared them for. She wanted to say the right thing, to ease his pain, but she knew there was no simple answer. "You don't have to have all the answers right now," Serafina said gently. "But remember, I'm here for you. You're not alone in this, Milo. We'll get through it together." In the days that followed, Milo continued to wrestle with the emotional fallout from his mother's revelations. The legal separation from Kendall moved forward, but the emotional chasm between him and Serafina remained wide. Milo knew that his mother had done what she thought was best. But the betrayal he felt, not just from Kendall, but from the secrecy his mother had kept, weighed on him. For Serafina, the decision to keep everything hidden from her son was starting to feel like a burden too heavy to bear. She had always protected him, but now the consequences of that protection were spilling over, and she wasn't sure what the future held. But one thing was clear: the truth had shattered their family, and no matter what, they would have to rebuild from the wreckage. The conference room was cold, sterile, and unnervingly silent. Serafina Westbrook sat at the head of the long table, her fingers lightly drumming against the smooth surface as she glanced at the array of legal documents in front of her. The room felt like a battleground, each person there an armed combatant, prepared to fight for what they thought was rightfully theirs. Milo Hawke, sitting beside his mother, looked tense, his hands fidgeting with the cuff of his shirt. He had been silent for most of the meeting, his mind still tangled in the emotional wreckage of the past few weeks. His eyes flicked nervously between Serafina and Kendall Blaze, who was seated across from him. Next to Kendall, her lawyer, Carter Mason, sat with an air of practiced confidence. His crisp suit and sharp, calculating gaze betrayed no emotion as he placed the proposal on the table. His demeanor was cool, professional, as if he had prepared for this moment for years. And in some ways, he had. "Serafina," Carter Mason began, his voice calm but assertive. "As you know, my client, Kendall Blaze, has filed for legal separation and is seeking a more equitable arrangement regarding the family's finances. We believe the establishment of a family trust is the best solution to address the interests of all parties involved." The words hung in the air, an unsettling reminder of just how far Kendall was willing to go to control what was hers, or what she thought was hers. The proposal outlined a plan for a trust that would grant Kendall and Milo a say in managing Serafina's assets, with a promise of future transparency. Carter looked at Serafina with a practiced smile, his eyes gleaming with the expectation of victory. "We're proposing a 50-50 split of the trust's control," Carter continued, his voice smooth. "This way, each of you, Serafina and Kendall, will have equal say in the financial decisions of the family. It's an opportunity to work together as a unified entity. We believe this is in everyone's best interest." Serafina's eyes narrowed slightly, and she let the words sink in. Equal say. Kendall's idea of unity was a well-disguised power grab. Serafina could already see through it. She knew that Kendall Blaze didn't care about unity. She cared about control. The stakes in this meeting couldn't have been higher. On one side, Kendall Blaze was trying to gain access to Serafina's wealth, to claim her place in the family's financial structure and use it to her advantage. On the other side, Serafina knew she had to protect what she had worked for all these years, the wealth she had kept hidden to shield her son from the burden of it all. But Serafina had a plan, and it wasn't one that would involve giving in to Kendall's demands. She had already thought this through, every angle, every contingency. This wasn't just about the money. It was about the future, her future, Milo's future, and what kind of family they wanted to be. "I see, Carter," Serafina said, her voice calm, almost too calm. She sat up straighter in her chair, her eyes never leaving Carter as she placed her own proposal on the table. It was simple, direct, a sharp contrast to the web of legal jargon Kendall's team had presented. "I have a counteroffer," Serafina said, her tone measured and cool. "We can set up a trust, but I will retain full control." The room seemed to hold its breath. "What I'm proposing," Serafina continued, "is a trust that will secure Milo's future, but it will be irrevocable. There will be no changes, no manipulation. The assets will be distributed according to my wishes, and I will retain the ability to make decisions without interference. Kendall will be removed from the equation entirely. There will be no equal partnership. I won't allow it." The room fell silent. Milo glanced at Kendall, then back to Serafina, his expression a mix of confusion and unease. He hadn't expected his mother to be so direct, so unapologetically firm. This wasn't the woman he had known. This was something different, something far more powerful. Kendall Blaze's face hardened, and she leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped in front of her on the table. "What you're suggesting, Serafina, is completely unacceptable. You can't just cut me out of the family's future." "I can," Serafina replied smoothly, her eyes locking with Kendall's. "And I will." There was a pause before Carter Mason spoke up, his voice tight with frustration. "This is going too far, Serafina. You're jeopardizing everything. If you refuse to work with us, we'll take this to court, and it will get ugly. There are far-reaching consequences to your actions." Serafina's gaze never wavered. She knew exactly what this meant. Carter Mason was trying to bully her into backing down, into conceding control. But she had spent too many years building this life to let it slip through her fingers now. "You think I'm afraid of ugly?" Serafina asked, her voice cold and unyielding. "I've already seen the ugly side of life. I've faced it head on. I'm not backing down, Carter. Not this time." Milo sat back in his chair, his face a study in conflicting emotions. The tension in the room was suffocating, and for the first time in the entire meeting, he spoke, his voice quiet but firm. "Mom, is this really the way we should be handling this?" he asked, his gaze flickering between his mother and Kendall. "Is this the only way?" Serafina looked at him, her eyes softening for just a moment. But her resolve didn't waver. "This is the only way, Milo. I'm doing this to protect you and to protect everything your father and I built. I won't let it be destroyed by someone who only sees it as a means to an end." She turned back to Kendall. "If you want a seat at the table, Kendall, it will be as a guest, not a partner. If you continue to fight this, I'll have no choice but to cut you off completely." For a moment, it seemed as if Kendall Blaze might snap. But then, her eyes flickered with something else. A cold calculation, a flicker of recognition that Serafina Westbrook was no longer the weak, quiet widow she had once believed her to be. "This isn't over," Kendall said, her voice tight with barely restrained fury. We'll see how far you're willing to go, Serafina." As the meeting ended, the air was thick with the weight of unspoken words and unresolved tension. Serafina Westbrook had shown her hand, and now there was no turning back. The stakes had been raised higher than ever, and while the future was uncertain, one thing was clear. Serafina had just taken control of the situation, and Kendall Blaze had underestimated her. The legal battle was far from over, but Serafina's proposal had sent a clear message. She would fight for her family, she would fight for Milo's future, and no one, not even her own daughter-in-law, would take that from her. The dust had finally settled. The courtroom battles, the accusations, the lies, all of it was behind them now. Serafina Westbrook had fought hard, not just for her wealth, but for her family, for the future she wanted to preserve. And now, standing at the threshold of a new chapter, she was ready to leave the tangled web of deceit and manipulation behind her. The $5 million settlement had done its work. Kendall Blaze had vanished from their lives as quickly and quietly as she had entered them. The money was paid, the agreement signed, and Kendall's hold on Milo had been severed. It hadn't been an easy decision, but it had been the right one. The peace that followed was the kind Serafina had longed for, but never thought possible. Milo, too, was starting to heal. It had been a painful process, one that had taken longer than Serafina had hoped. But after the storm had passed, after the emotional wreckage had been cleared, Milo was beginning to understand. He had struggled with betrayal, with the weight of secrets kept from him for so long. But in time, he realized that Serafina had done what she thought was best. She had shielded him from the complexities of wealth, from the heavy expectations of a fortune that wasn't his to bear. Their relationship, once strained to the breaking point, was slowly mending. They had long talks, sometimes awkward, sometimes painful, but always honest. Milo began to understand why his mother had kept so much from him, and in turn he began to forgive her. He no longer saw her as the woman who had deceived him. Instead, he saw a mother who had protected him in her own way. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. As for Serafina, she had spent so many years living in the shadows, hiding behind the quiet mask of modesty, pretending to be something she was not. But now, with the burdens of the past finally lifted, she was free. Free to live her life on her own terms, without fear or guilt. She had learned many lessons along the way. The greatest of them all was that true happiness wasn't found in the accumulation of wealth, but in the simplicity of a life lived authentically. Her wealth, once a source of pride, had become a tool for survival, for protecting her family. But now, it was a part of her past, something she no longer needed to hide behind. The $5 million settlement had cleared the way for Milo to find peace, to heal from the emotional turmoil he had suffered. And with Kendall Blaze gone, there was space for him to breathe, to move forward without the shadow of manipulation hanging over him. Serafina had done what she could to protect him. Now it was time for him to find his own way, free from the tangled legacy of wealth and deceit. But the real change came when Serafina made the decision to leave. She had spent so many years in the same city, in the same apartment, but the memories of the past had begun to weigh too heavily on her. She needed to start fresh, to build a new life far away from the ghosts of her former existence. She moved to Santa Fe, a place that had always intrigued her, with its vibrant art scene, rich history, and the promise of quiet anonymity. It was there, in the heart of New Mexico, that Serafina Westbrook finally found peace. In Santa Fe, she created a quiet cultural foundation, one that reflected her true values. She called it the Thomas Fund in honor of her late husband, Thaddeus Calder. The foundation supported young engineers from humble backgrounds, helping them bring their ideas to life, just as Thaddeus had done years ago. The joy of watching these young innovators present their work at international fairs filled her with a sense of purpose she had never experienced before. Serafina realized, as she sat in the warm desert sun, that this was the life she had always wanted. Not the wealth, not the hidden secrets, but the simple joy of making a difference in the world. She no longer cared about the opinion of others or the mask of respectability. Her life had become a reflection of her true values: honesty, authenticity, and a deep, quiet connection to the world around her. In Santa Fe, she wasn't Serafina Westbrook, the secret millionaire. She was simply Serafina, a woman who had lived through the storm and emerged stronger, wiser, and at peace. Serafina's relationship with Milo had come full circle. Their dinners were no longer filled with awkward silences or sharp words. There were moments of laughter, shared stories, and finally, a mutual understanding of one another. He had found a new partner in his life, Sarah, someone who didn't care about their wealth, who loved Milo for who he was, not for what his family could offer. Serafina was finally able to meet Sarah, and there, at dinner, she saw the woman who had truly brought her son peace. The future was bright. Not because of the money Serafina had accumulated, but because of the life she was now able to live, free from the shadows of her past. As the years passed, the rumors about Serafina Westbrook's fortune faded into the background. She became known in her community not for her wealth, but for her generosity, her quiet kindness, and the way she supported young minds trying to change the world. At Christmas, the house was filled with the sound of genuine laughter, not the forced kind, but the real, warm kind that filled every corner of the room. There were no gold-plated platters, no displays of wealth, just hot cocoa, cookies, and Milo, his new family, and Serafina all together. She sat back, watching them all with a sense of contentment, and realized that for the first time in years, everything was as it should be. The phone buzzed on the table, and Serafina glanced at the screen. It was a message from Milo. "Mom, I'm proud of you." She smiled and typed back, "I'm proud of you too, sweetheart." And for the first time in a long time, Serafina Westbrook felt truly free.